the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Then he made us. As he promised. Abraham.
You meant evil against me, yes. But God meant it for good. To bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today.
My son. My son.
Well, good evening. Welcome to 412 Church. If you're new here, I want to tell you that you're welcome. If you made it through the several layers of people out there smiling and throwing cookies at you and hot chocolate and all that stuff, just in case no one said it yet, welcome this evening. Glad to have you here. We're studying the book of Genesis together, so make sure to turn there in your Bibles, the first book there in your Bible. But I hope you're having a wonderful, joyful, grateful Christmas season so far. I realized this morning, we're about halfway through the Christmas season. Didn't we just enter it yesterday? It was just Halloween, exactly. I don't know what's going on. But God is good in so many different ways. And this is a wonderful place to be right now. I want to share a couple of things here with you. First off, on Sunday, I mentioned that at Christmas time, people suddenly get very grateful for Christians being Christians and Christians doing things that Christians do the rest of the year, but all of a sudden now people start saying thank you. Well, hopefully you hear thank you from me a whole lot more than just at Christmas time, but here's a group I want to say thank you to. This was a group from 412 here that went over to the Village. It's a retirement home, assisted living place here in town, and we got multiple ministries at places like this. Pastor Schuyler has a ministry over at Camelot. Pastor Thomas leads a ministry over here at the Village. And on Sunday, a group of the people from our life groups here at 412 Church went together to go bless, sing to, encourage, and present gifts to people over there at the Village. And so thank you if you were on that team. Thank you for showing what Christians are, showing people what we're all about. We're about telling people about Jesus and doing so in a joyful way. And man, what a ministry there. There's so many other things. We're going to share those on Sunday, though. God is using 412 Church to reach literally hundreds of people all over this valley, all over Southern California, into Mexico and beyond. And we get to share much more of that on Sunday. But that's just a little bit of what's going on here at 412 Church. Please do remember, we're going to keep saying this until we get there, December 22nd is Christmas Sunday. We have these little flyers here for you to take and to invite your friends to come to church that Sunday because we want people to encounter the real Jesus from the Gospel of Luke. But that day starts a new page for us here at 412 Church. That day we're starting 3 English services and 1 Spanish service. Then you have the times up there. That is going to continue. Please make sure you hear this. That is going to continue from that day forward. Not before that day. Not only that day, but it's going to start that day and continue into 2025. We're going to keep those service times, 8 o'clock, 9:45, 11:30, and 2 p.m. for the Spanish service. One other note there is the 8 o'clock service will not have kids ministry and nursery. We're going to give our kids ministry a break for that service. Having 3 kids myself, I know that a lot of parents just aren't going to bring their kids there to the 8 o'clock service anyway, but if you do, as I do, I bring my kids to the 8:30 service currently. Please keep bringing your kids. We love having the family together at church. Kids need to see their parents praying, singing, worshiping, listening, reading their Bible, being part of the church. Because someday they're going to be out of the kids' ministry, they're going to be out of the middle school ministry, they're going to grow up out of the high school ministry. Where are they going to go? For many, they don't come back. Part of the reason is they don't see mom and dad in church. They get kind of shoved off to the corner. Bring your family, bring your kids, show them how Christians live, how Christians speak, how Christians worship together. So please, from me, bring your kids to church. Even if it's not the 8 o'clock service, bring them to the 9:45 or the 11:30, whichever one you're coming to. Bring your kids with you and then shove them off to the kids' ministry while you're helping out with another ministry or one of the other service times. Okay, that'd be great. All right, please make note of that. 2025, that's the game plan. All right, book of Genesis. We are about halfway through, almost, through the book of Genesis now. You're saying, well, about time. We're halfway through the year. It's been about 6 months we've been in the book of Genesis. Just so you know, when I was in high school, it took my youth pastor 4 years to get through Genesis. I promise you it won't take us 4 years to get through Genesis. Okay, we're about halfway through already. We're in chapter 24, and we've been looking at the story of us. Where did we come from? Where did the world get to be? How did the world get to be how it is now? Well, that story begins back in the book of Genesis with the human story, chapters 1 through 11, and then the Hebrew story, the story that begins with Abraham and really goes down to today. And we're going to see, again, pieces of that as we've observed many times through studying the book of Genesis. Much of what is going on in the world today has its origin, its beginning, its catalyst right here in the book of Genesis. And you and I are continuing to live this story that began so long ago. Now, we're going to begin chapter 24 here together, a chapter about a wedding. Well, at least kind of a wedding. And we're going to hopefully get into chapter 25 where we're going to see another wedding, kind of. But you'll notice something here at the beginning of chapter 24. A long story is drawing to an end. Chapter 24 begins like this, and I do find this rather funny. Now, Abraham was old, well advanced in years. Okay, I'm not making fun of him because he's old, but he's really old. He's about 140 at this point. Anyone? No. Don't lie to me. This was a high school thing. Someone would raise their hand just to be that guy. He's about 140 years old. He's going to live to 175. According to the author here, Moses, he lives to 175 years old. He's 140. And the author again points to the fact, again, that Abraham is really old. Just remember, he started his story back in chapter 12 at 75 years old. He's been old this whole time. Maybe you're at the point of life where you're looking back at 75 like, that's not that old. No. I hope to be old one day. When I'm 75, I'm going to gladly bear that title, old man, okay? He was an old man when this thing started. He's actually called an old man early in the story there. And now it's almost double his lifespan later. He's old and well advanced in years. And Abraham knows something. His time is about out. He doesn't know he's got another 35 years on the clock. He's a spring chicken, right? He's good. But he recognizes something. Life is temporary. He just buried his wife, we saw last week, Sarah, his Eitzer, his helper, his wife, his companion, his friend. She's now buried in the cave at Machpelah. And his 40-year-old son is still there sitting next to him, Isaac, about 40 years old at this point. He doesn't have any kids. Doesn't even have a wife. And Abraham, who waited 25 years for God to fulfill his promise of a child, has now waited 40 years and there's no grandbabies. Grandma's gone. But God promised way back when I was a young spring chicken at 75, I would have descendants like the stars of the sky, like the sand of the sea. I've got 2 kids that I know of, Ishmael and Isaac, and no grandbabies yet. When will this nation it's been 65 years, God. 2 people don't make a nation. Two guys don't make a nation. One of them's not even married yet. One of them is. When will this all happen? Well, this chapter 24, is a really unique chapter. It's maybe the most detailed chapter in all the book of Genesis, showing us kind of the culture and the nature of life at this time in this place. And Abraham has to make a decision all about the family. You remember the old show, All in the Family? You remember Archie and Edith? And those were the days, right? When girls were girls and men were men, et cetera, et cetera. When Herbert Hoover, we need a man like Herbert Hoover, remember that? Well, just remember the good old days weren't the good old days back in the good old days. There was days before that we were saying the good old days, and the reality is the good old days are the one you're living right now. This is the day that the Lord has given you. This is the day God has given you to do something, to make it good or to ruin it, as Abraham has ruined many a good days. Well, this chapter, he's looking to make a wedding, but not for himself. And someone's going to go looking for a bride, but not for himself. We're going to notice here, there's 2 characters here at the beginning of the story, both of whom are looking for a bride, but not for them. It's for someone else. The son of promise needs a bride, And so his father prepares the way, sends someone to prepare the way for his son to receive his bride. Interesting parallel if you think about Jesus' story. We're studying the book of Luke right now on Sundays. We're going to see this Sunday the prophecy of a guy named John who would prepare the way for the son of promise, who would give his life to redeem a bride for himself. Here, Abraham, good old dad, sends someone to find a bride. Now, a couple of things we got to lay the groundwork for. This chapter displays for us a very different culture, a very different world, a very different way of doing marriage and finding love and all those kinds of things. And before we arrogantly look back on people of the past and say, what barbarians, what fools, what idiots, aren't we just so smart? Aren't we just so refined in the way that we do everything in our lives today? A couple of things we need to remember. We've observed this in a number of different ways already in the book of Genesis. But just because things are different does not necessarily mean they're wrong. That is an attitude that our culture suffers with chronically. If I don't like it, it's wrong. If it's unfamiliar to me, it's wrong. If it's not what I'm used to, it's wrong. I, in fact, had a conversation recently with someone who was kind of explaining how things work here at 412 Church. And they said, well, that's stupid. That's not how churches work. From someone who's never been a pastor, has never been on staff at a church, has gone to church on and off most of their life, and has gone only to churches of a certain size with a certain makeup, staff-wise and everything. I just told my friend, just because it's unfamiliar to you doesn't mean it's wrong. Same is true when you look back in history. It's so easy to look back on people and say, well, that's so stupid, that's so dumb, that's so barbaric, that's so archaic. We need to be very careful saying that to people just in our regular life, let alone of people in the past, when we are ignorant of why they did those things, how they did those things. Don't become arrogant toward people of the past. Because unlike you've often heard, people of the past were not all idiots. There were reasons that things were done a certain way. For example, this chapter, we're going to see something that is very foreign to our thought, and people will recoil at it. The first thing we're going to notice here is that this generation, this group of people, this culture, valued commitment when it comes to the issue of marriage far more than consummation. Our culture is obsessed with sex. And you hear it everywhere. You hear it in movies, on TV shows. I've even had it said to me in personal conversation. You got to sleep with them so you know whether you want to marry them. No. You better make sure you want to marry them. And you better marry them before you sleep with them, because there's a whole lot of baggage that follows. And if you haven't learned that from the story of Abraham yet, you haven't been paying attention. And you're going to see it again if we get going through the story. Commitment is more important to these people, and that's why they did the things that we're going to see here, why they did it the way they did it. Also, this generation valued accountability before affection. Our world today, even as Christians, we are so infected with the Disney worldview of what love is, of what marriage is. Disney tells us that love is an emotion, it's a feeling. Biblically, it's not. Biblical love, read Ephesians, read Matthew, read the Gospel of John. True, genuine, godly, biblical love is a choice. It starts with a choice. Affection, attraction can certainly be a part of it, especially if you're looking at marrying someone. But it's a choice. I'm going to choose to love this person no matter what comes. That's why wedding vows say, I promise to hold and to cherish you for better, for worse, for sicker, or for poor. It's a commitment. It's an accountability. Well, Abraham here in this culture, in this day, in this world, bears the accountability for his family. As the patriarch, as the dad of the family, he was responsible for his family, and that included finding a wife for his son. Now remember this through this story, because sometimes people look back on the past and say, those barbarians treating girls like that, marrying them off to people they didn't know. Just remember, Isaac doesn't know who he's going to marry either. Isaac's 40 years old, and his dad, who's 140, is picking his bride. I didn't let my dad pick my bride. Isaac doesn't know who's going to show up for his wedding. Neither does his bride. But Abraham takes his responsibility seriously. And so he picks the best person he can to send on the mission. You'll notice something else about the person who goes, the servant. Commitment and accountability are essential to him as well. Look at how this person is described here at the beginning of chapter 24. Now Abraham, verse 2, said to his servant, there's the word that we've seen over and over again through Abraham's story. Servant, slave. Abraham is we might call a slave owner, a master, someone who has responsibility, authority over people in a serving way. Remember also that Abraham calls himself a servant of the Lord. Chapter 18, twice he bows to the ground and calls himself a servant. He is someone who serves someone greater than himself. He recognizes that. The number one title, we have said this many times, that heroes of the Bible, authors of the Bible, people in the Bible, the number one title that they give themselves is this term right here, slave. Same word that's used of this servant right here, at least Old Testament usage anyway. Notice this about this guy. Abraham picks his servant, the oldest of his household, and charged him, the oldest of his household who had charge over all he had. And he said, come, put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell, but will go to my country and to my kindred and take a wife for my son Isaac from there. So, this servant here, notice a couple things about him. Number one, he's the oldest of Abraham's family. This guy's been with Abraham a long time. He's also the one who has charge over all of Abraham's stuff. Abraham doesn't know it, but later in this very same book, one of his descendants would be a slave. Same word. His name would be Joseph. He'd end up in a place called Egypt. He would be sold as a slave by some other people we're going to see in this same story into a place called Egypt. He's a slave there for a guy named Potiphar. Potiphar recognizes Joseph's character and makes him the slave over his whole house. Later on, he'll be the slave or then the administrator, the bureaucrat over the entire kingdom of Egypt. This is someone who's important to Abraham. Abraham trusts this person with all of his stuff, and he tells him, leave all the stuff behind. I've got a special mission for you. Go find my son a bride. As we're looking at life, if you're younger and you're looking at getting married, if you're not married yet, or maybe you have been married and you're not now, or maybe you've got kids or grandkids that are looking at finding a spouse. There's certain principles that we can take from this story right here, from godly, prayerful, amiable people, and apply them in our own life. Number one here that I observe as we look at finding a spouse, back up here, is ask someone trustworthy. Abraham is a man of character. Has he made mistakes? Oh, yeah. But one of the things that he does really well is pick someone who's really trustworthy. He trusts this man with his whole house. Now he's going to trust him with his son, literally with the rest of his life. He's 140 years old, no grandkids. He's trusting this man to fulfill God's promise for his family. Pick someone trustworthy and ask them, this girl that I like, what do you think about her? Ask her parents. Ask her pastors. Ask her friends. About 13 years ago, I was living in Kansas City, Missouri, and I drove out here to Hemet, California, and was going to school, and I saw this girl. She was handing out donuts, and I noticed her before I noticed the donuts. And there was attraction, but I wanted to know about her. Thankfully, she was standing next to my mom, so I asked my mom first, who's this girl standing next to you? And then I went and found Jack and Joni Vaughn. Some of you might know or have known Jack and Joni. They were there was a couple that I trusted. And I knew that they knew this young lady, and I wanted their opinion because I trusted them. They said, go for it. So that was step one. Find someone. All right, here we go. Okay? Well, why does he tell the guy here to put his hand under his thigh? We've seen Abraham make oaths a number of different ways here in the book of Genesis. One of the ways that God made an oath, a covenant with Abraham, was to take some animals and split them in half. And with all the blood and everything there on the ground, God walked between it to establish a covenant with Abraham. It signified that if I don't keep my part of the bargain, I'm going to be split open. I'm going to die like these things here. It was a way of communicating commitment. In a previous chapter, Abraham meets with a guy named Abimelech and makes a promise of basically a non-aggression pact with him. I'm not going to deceive you. We're not going to attack each other. We're going to be friends. And he seals the deal by giving the man 7 sheep. Here, Abraham asked this guy to do something very different, to place his hand under his thigh. This is not something weird. People have twisted this, contorted this, because we have twisted, contorted, gross minds. There is nothing abnormal about this. This was a way of signifying, of getting someone's attention and saying, take what I'm about to say very, very seriously. It's a very vulnerable position. And you're going to pay attention when you got your hand that close to someone. If there's a parallel in our world today, it'd be something like this. When something really important is happening, when you are given a specific mission, a specific role, the way that we do it today is to raise your hand. Why? Anyone ever thought about that? Why do we do certain things that we do? Why do we hit our bodies to show agreement? Who came up with that? Why not slap our thighs? Why do we clap our hands? Why don't we slap our face? Why do we do that? Why do we raise a hand? Well, maybe it's to show I'm not crossing my fingers. I don't have a knife behind my back. Maybe it's to show I'm serious about this. Why does he have his hand on the Bible? Well, at least we used to be a culture that thought this book had value. It had weight to it. It demanded a level of respect and a level of accountability. To say, I'm going to do this with God as my witness used to mean something for some people. It may not for many anymore. This meant something to this guy. A man that Abraham trusted, take this seriously, go on a mission. Find a wife for my son not from my family, not from the Canaanites. Why? Why does he ask him to do that specifically? Why travel 450 miles to find a wife for Isaac when there's women all around? He's in a whole other region of the world. Why travel 450 miles? Hopefully find someone and bring her back 450 miles. Who would even do that? Well, there's a reason. And it's not because Abraham's a bigot. We saw back in chapter 14, his best friends are Amorites, Canaanites. Abimelech is a Philistine, and Abraham has a great relationship with him. They have a non-aggression pact. Abimelech's called a man of integrity. He's a Philistine, a Canaanite. We saw last week that he buries his wife in the cave of Hittites, and all through chapter 23, he is bowing and honoring the sons of Heth, Hittites, Canaanites. Abraham's not a bigot. Why does he want his son not marrying someone from that area, though? Well, because marriage matters. If you're going to spend the rest of your life with someone, if you're going to bear the responsibility of picking a wife for someone else, you're probably going to take that very, very seriously. Someone later on did not take that very seriously. In fact, it was Abraham's. Oh, I am so sorry. That was the wrong reference. Genesis. This is Genesis chapter 26. I have to go look it up later. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. It's the wrong reference. Just a couple chapters ahead. Esau, Isaac's next son, or Isaac's, one of Isaac's sons, is going to end up marrying two Canaanite ladies, two Hittites. And we're told there that they make life bitter for Isaac and for Rebekah. It wasn't the fact that they were Hittites that made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. It was the fact that they had a different worldview. And Abraham doesn't want his son marrying someone from this area that has a different worldview. We as Christians are told are we going to get this? I don't know if we're going to get, is this thing working or not? There we go. Okay. There's the point there. Be compatible with the person you're going to marry. We as Christians are told, we are commanded in 2 Corinthians chapter 6 to not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. That's often applied to marriage. The text is not specifically about marriage. It's kind of in general. We as Christians are to be very careful in our relationships with everyone, but especially when we lock ourselves into relationships with other people, whether that be financial, especially relational, especially when it comes to marriage. When you don't have the same fundamental worldview with someone, your domestic peace is going to be at risk. When human life is valued differently by people that are going to spend the rest of their life together, it's going to come to conflict. Whether you view children as a blessing or a burden can bring conflict. Whether you think there is a God or not a God, whether human beings are given value by God or they're just cosmic dust, is going to bring conflict into life because we're going to operate life differently. And Abraham doesn't want that for his wife. Paul didn't want that for Christians in their life. And so he uses this example of not being unequally yoked Kind of like when your car, you got one side of your car. I was driving down the road down Florida Avenue one day, and this truck was in front of me. It was lifted on one side, and it wasn't on the other. And I was wondering, how did he get in the car? How did he close the door? That's kind of what the illustration there is in an agricultural sense. When you're unequally yoked, you got one animal who's faster than the other, one who's stronger than the other, one who's just thinking differently. When I was about 12 years old, my dad took me on a backpacking trip, and we had a horse. His name was Poke. Poke was an excellent horse, fantastic horse. And he did things that most horses would never do. He was abnormal. Most horses would have killed me on that trip. Years later, my father got me and my brother mules because mules are much more sure-footed. They're not as fast, they're not as pretty, they're not as cool, but they are more careful. They are more hardy when it comes to the kind of things that we want to do. So don't be unequally yoked. Abraham doesn't want that for his son. Look here what he says now in chapter 24. Verse 5, so the servant said to him, perhaps the woman of that land will not be willing to come. Must I then take your son back to that land? And Abraham said, see that you do not take my son back there. God has promised us this land. Don't take him, don't leave. For the Lord, verse 7, the God of heaven who took me from my father's house and from the land of my kindred, who spoke to me and swore to me, to your offspring I will give this land. He will send his angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this oath of mine, only you must not take my son back there. So the servant put his hand under Abraham's thigh and swore to him concerning this matter. Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of choice gifts for his master, and rose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. Now, where is that exactly? Well, Nahor is not the name of a city. It's the name of a person. It's a person we saw way back in Genesis, the end of chapter 11. Nahor is Abraham's brother, who's living back home in the area of Mesopotamia, today the area of Iraq. And it's there that we read at the end of chapter 22, right after the whole issue with Abraham sacrificing Isaac, that Abraham is told in the end of chapter 22, verse 20, after these things it was told to Abraham that Milcah has borne children to your brother Nahor. And you have these different names of his sons there, but verse 23 has this kind of parenthetical line. It might even be in parentheses in your translation. Now, Bethuel was the father of Rebekah. Kind of front-loading the story there for us, because for about a chapter later, we don't even find out who Rebekah is. He travels 450 miles through the desert to find a wife. How far is 450 miles? Well, it's about to Phoenix and back. I recently drove to Phoenix. There's a lot of nothing between here and Phoenix. Like, you get to Palm Desert, and there's a whole lot of nothing between Palm Desert, Indio, I guess, and Blythe. And there's a whole lot of nothing between Blythe and Phoenix. There's nothing. Back then, there was a whole lot of nothing. There's still a whole lot of nothing there. 450 miles with camels. It would take at least, if you were like really booking it, at least a couple of weeks. It took me like 6 hours to get to Phoenix. This was not like that. This was a long trip. It takes 10 camels loaded with gifts. And they arrive at the city of Nahor. Verse 11, and he made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well at the time of the evening, the time when the women would go out to draw water. And he said, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show steadfast love to my master Abraham. For behold, I am standing by the water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming to draw. So let the young woman to whom I say, please let me drink, please let down your jar that I may drink. And who shall say, drink, and I will water your camels as well. Let her be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac. By this I shall know that you have shown steadfast love to my master. Third thing to observe there about finding a spouse or making really big decisions in your life is to pray. This servant who has responsibility over all of Abraham's stuff. Remember, Abraham's a very wealthy man. He's set that all aside to go on this special mission. He travels 450 miles. He's focused on success, but when he gets there, he's not haphazard about it. I'll just pick any old woman. If you had to make a really big decision in life, would you pray? You should. Notice how this guy talks, though. He keeps referring to the God of my master, Abraham. It's not that this guy doesn't believe in God, but he recognizes that God has chosen Abraham for a special purpose, and he's just along for the ride. He's just a servant. He's just a messenger accomplishing God's promise, God's mission in Abraham's life. I also assume here from how he talks that he's really been influenced by Abraham. Has Abraham made mistakes? Absolutely. But Abraham was a guy who knew God, who trusted God. And the people around him are influenced by that. Here's one of them. Praise to God, let the woman that I ask for a drink not only be of such character that she offers me, a stranger, a drink while she's working, but let her stop what she's doing and water my camels. He's got 10 camels, and they've traveled 450 miles. Probably not nonstop. I've never been around camels. I've been around horses. Horses drink a lot, especially when they've been traveling. Camels, I assume, drink more. It's not an easy task. But someone shows up. Look there at verse 15. Before he had finished speaking, stop there. Notice that. Sometimes God makes you wait 25 years. Sometimes he makes you wait 65 years. Sometimes you don't even finish the prayer. God just shows up when he wants to, right? A wizard is never late, right? Okay, my wife's the only one who laughed at that joke. Okay. Lord of the Rings, never mind. Thank you. You're just being nice. That's it. Before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, what a wonderful name. What a beautiful name for a bride. Hi, honey. Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with her jar on her shoulder, and the young woman was very attractive in appearance. Look at me, honey. There you go. Okay. There you are. The young woman was very attractive in appearance, a maiden with whom no man had known, and she went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. And when the servant ran to meet her, he said, "Please give me a little water to drink from your jar." And she said, "Drink, my lord." And she quickly let down her jar and gave him a drink. And when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, "I will draw water for your camels as well until they have finished drinking." And so she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran again to the well to draw water. And she drew for all the camels as well. And the man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. We're told there's something about Rebekah. She's awful pretty. Some might call her a trophy wife. See what I did there? Some people are looking for that trophy wife. A servant here, whatever his name was, maybe it was Eliezer, we see Eliezer back in Genesis chapter 15. He's looking for a bride, someone special for his master. But notice, he doesn't ask God to send him a trophy wife. He doesn't ask God to send him a pretty girl. He asks God to send him someone of character, someone of compassion, someone of service. Peter later will talk to Christian women about true beauty. And there he tells women, doesn't tell you not to dress up, but he says, when you dress up, don't let that be the thing that attracts people to you. Don't let your jewelry and your appearance and your hair be the thing that draws people to you. Instead, let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. We saw that last week because he then uses Sarah as an example of that. She referred to her husband as my Lord. You see Rebekah there? Refers to this unknown person as my Lord. Same term. Not as my husband, someone who has authority over me, but just she's courteous, she's respectful, she's serving, and this guy has found a diamond. Now, we all like shiny things, but what does a good wife actually look like? Again, Disney tells you one thing, Hollywood tells you one thing. The Bible gives us a great picture of a beautiful wife. It's in Proverbs 31. I really want you to hear this. This is not just for the guys who are looking for a wife. This is for the ladies as well. And in fact, this is for moms and for children. If you go to Proverbs 31, that chapter is actually written by a woman. Well, it was spoken by a woman, the mother of a king. And she, in that chapter, is telling her son how a good king lives in the first part of the chapter. But then she tells her son what a good woman looks like, what a good wife looks like. And if you go there, Proverbs 31, again, moms, please read that with your children. Show your daughter what God says a godly wife looks like. Tell your sons what to look for in a wife. Maybe you'll even see yourself there like, hey, I do that. Husbands, read it with your wife and compliment your wife when you say, you do that. I love you for that. As you look through Proverbs 31, though, you'll notice something. Physical appearance does not appear anywhere. It says, an excellent wife who can find? She's rare, like jewels, like gold, like silver. But it all has to do with her character, with her virtue, with her diligence. Not once is her appearance mentioned, except at the end where it says, beauty is fleeting. Someday, you're not going to look like you did on your wedding day. You better have a diamond inside. And that better come out as you get older, not fade because you're fake. Proverbs 31. Finding a spouse also takes a test. When you are looking at marrying someone, you got to ask people you trust, like, is this someone I should even waste my time on or spend my time on? Be compatible with that person. Make sure you're at least on the same planet in regards to your values and what you believe. Pray, ask God, like, God, is this a quality person, whether a husband or a wife? Is this someone I can live with? Is this someone I can trust? And then run some tests. Again, about 13 years ago, I went to the Harvest Crusade with Greg Laurie down there in Anaheim. And I think it was in Anaheim. It was the Dodger Stadium, I don't remember. But I wasn't really paying attention to the scenery. I was focused on something else. So there was a young lady there. Her name was, well, you know her name. And same girl who was at the donut shop, donut stand. She knew I was interested. But on this particular trip, we were there at the Harvest Crusade, and she had some friends with her who were younger than her. And I was watching to see how she handled chaos. Because if you've ever been to the Harvest Crusade, there's thousands of people. They're everywhere. It's craziness. It's like going to a Dodgers game. And you're trying to wrangle a bunch of young teenage girls. I wasn't going to do it. I wanted to see what she did. Didn't tell her at the time, but that was a test. I just wanted to observe what kind of leader she was, how she did there. Well, she did pretty good, I guess. So, notice the test there. The test is important. Not just will you be courteous to me, but will you go above and beyond? And she absolutely does. She says, I'll not only give your camels something to drink, but they can drink until it says there, verse 19, they have finished drinking. And then she does it right there. And the man again gazes and wonders, kind of like Mary we saw on Sunday, wondering, pondering, looking, discerning, seeing if God, is this real? Is this really the one? He's focused. Verse 22, then when the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold ring weighing half a shekel and 2 bracelets for her arms weighing 10 gold shekels and said, please tell me whose daughter you are. And she tells him, I'm the daughter of Bethuel, this relative. So he's in the right place. Abraham told him to go find a relative. And verse 26, kind of jump down here. Verse 26, the man bowed his head and worshiped the Lord. Just kind of make a note of that, because we're going to come back to this servant. There's a bunch of unnamed heroes in the Bible. This guy's one of them. And you're going to see this multiple times. Not only does he have wisdom, is he trustworthy, is he committed, but he's also a man of worship. When he finds what God has provided, he takes the time to thank God. Remember Jesus one time healed 10 people, 10 lepers? And only one of them says thank you? He's that kind of a guy. Then, verse 27, and he said, blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his steadfast love toward my master. This guy recognizes what's happening here. God is keeping his promise. Then, verse 28, the young woman ran and told her mother's household about these things. And Rebekah brought her brother, whose name was Laban. Okay, well, first off, jewelry never hurts, right, ladies? She got some jewelry. She's excited. She runs home. Goes to show everybody the stuff, and Laban shows up. Laban will be important later in the story. He's gonna show up again. When you're looking at marrying someone, when you're, if you have foster that relationship with your grandkids to where they care about your opinion about who they marry, encourage them. When you're looking at marrying someone, make sure to get to know their family. Because when you get married, you're not marrying the family, but you're marrying into that family. And that will impact things. It will affect your life. It always does. Ask Pastor Skyler. He does a lot of the marriage counseling and stuff around here. She runs and he brings a guy to meet the family. The first person we see here is Rob. It's doing it again. Okay, we'll go like that. Laban there in verse 29. Laban ran toward the man to the spring, and as soon as he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's arm and heard the words of his sister, thus the man spoke to me. He went to the man, and behold, he was standing by the camels and said, "Come in, O blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside? For I have prepared the house for you and a place for the camels." So the man ran to the house. Thank you, sir. Ran to the house and laid out food for him, etc., etc. Verse 34. So he said, "I am Abraham's servant, and the Lord has greatly blessed my master. He has given him flocks and silver and gold." And he kind of goes on, just kind of retells the whole story, what happened. Abraham sent me here, made me put my hand under his thigh, and sent me to get a wife, and I found your sister here. Then, verse 50, you kind of skip down here. Then Laban and Bethuel, brother and father, answered and said, "This thing has come from the Lord." Notice there, again, why I said earlier, Abraham wanted a wife for his son from this place, because these people seem to know who God is. There have been people that have said, well, Abraham came from a pagan, idolatrous background. Well, the area in which he did come from, did have that culture, but every time we see his family, they seem to know who the Lord is. They're not shocked when Yahweh, the God of Abraham, is mentioned here. Here's an example of that. This is from the Lord. They recognize that as well. We cannot speak good or bad. So behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken. And when Abraham's servant heard these words, he again, notice this, bowed himself to the earth before the Lord, man of worship. And the servant brought out jewelry, there you go, of silver and gold and garments, and gave them to Rebekah, and gave some to her brother and to her family, giving out all these gifts. And verse 54, he and the men who were with him ate and drank, and they spent the night there. And when they had arose in the morning, he said, "Send me away to my master." But her brother and mother said, "Let her stay at least 10 days, and after that she may go." Now that seems like a reasonable request, right? This guy shows up, gives you a bunch of gifts, and says, "I want to take your daughter, your sister, 450 miles away to marry someone you've never met. Well, give us at least 10 days to say goodbye." It seems reasonable to me. But the servant here is focused. I don't think he's being a jerk at this point. He's ready to go. God has promised. God has fulfilled that promise. Let's go. So verse 56, he said to them, "Do not delay me, since the Lord has prospered my way. Send me away so that I may go to my master." And he said, so they said, "Let us call the young woman and ask her." And they called Rebekah and asked her, "Will you go with this man?" And she said, "Yes, I will go." So they sent Rebekah, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant with his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, "Our sister, may you become thousands of 10,000s, and," note this, "may your offspring possess the gates of those who hate him." That should sound familiar. Another point to the finding the spouse thing is you got to ask at some point. Now, the deal's kind of already been made, but they ask Rebekah here at this point, "You ready to go right now?" And she says, "Yes." I don't know why. I wouldn't be. I think I would want a little more information. I just met you. You just kind of told this short story. There's a bunch of gifts. Thank you. But what's his name? What's he like? I want to know some more information. Don't know what it is about Rebekah, but we've seen her character already. Here, she's asked the question. She's not forced. She's asked, "Are you willing to go?" And she says yes. But look at the blessing that her family gives her. Now remember, this is 450 miles away. And they give this blessing that echoes of a prophecy, actually. "May your descendant, your offspring, possess the gates of those who hate him." That was something that God had said to Abraham about 30 years earlier. This is in chapter 22, during the whole sacrifice scene. When God stops Abraham from sacrificing Isaac, he blesses him with several blessings, and one of them is, your offspring will possess the gates of his enemies. Remember, that's a single offspring. And Paul in the book of Galatians says that's Jesus. Even points to that verse. Says it's not offsprings, it's offspring, singular. It's Jesus. Here, her family, unbeknownst, inspired, give the same blessing. May your descendant, may your offspring possess the gates of those who hate him. Who would hate him? Like, why say something like that? Well, it was just a cliche. Maybe, but it echoes of that same promise. Then Rebekah, verse 61, and her young women arose with her and went with the camels, and thus the servant took Rebekah on his way. Now Isaac, verse 62, had returned from Beer Lahai Roi and was dwelling in the Negeb, and Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward the evening. Isaac, though he's one of the patriarchs of Israel, does not get much of a story. Of the patriarchs of Israel, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Isaac really is kind of the black sheep. He's the one that's left out. He's the forgotten one of the three. In fact, a lot of his story actually kind of revolves around other people. His wife really gets more of a story than Isaac does. She gets this part of the story, then the part where she tricks him later. But here's the one place where we see something of the heart of Isaac. He goes out knowing that this guy's on a mission. He's hundreds of miles away, but he goes out in the evening and is meditating. Again, we talked about this on Sunday. Biblical meditation is not emptying your mind, it's engaging your mind, focusing upon who God is, what his promise is, what his word is, and trusting. He's praying. Psalms 1, verse 2. I meditate on the law of the Lord day and night. God commands Joshua chapter 1, this law that I have given you, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Those 5 books are called the law. He tells Joshua, meditate on my law day and night. That doesn't mean turn your mind off. It means read, learn, meditate, discern, think. Isaac's out there thinking, praying, and someone shows up. Now, one of the pieces of jewelry that he gave her, you'll remember, was not just a bracelet, but a gold nose ring. Not my thing, just saying. There was a young lady more than 13 years ago that I was interested in, and then she put a nose ring on. It was not my anyway, not my thing. Okay, well, maybe it's Isaac's thing. It was a thing back then. So she has this gold ring. And, verse 64, as he's out there praying, Rebekah lifted her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel and asked the servant, who is this man walking in the field? And the servant said, it is my master, Isaac. And so she took her veil and covered her face, maybe to hide the nose ring. And the servant told Isaac all the things that had happened. And when Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah, his mother, he then took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. And so Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Remember, he's about 40 years old at this point. He's a mama's boy. He loved his mom. I don't say that as an insult. I love my mom too. She died in the last chapter, and it affected not only Abraham, who wept for her, we saw that, but it affected Isaac greatly as a grown man. Now, God has given him another woman, a wife instead of a mom. He lost his mom. Now he's got a wife. This, again, echoes of something we saw earlier in the book of Genesis. It's kind of the natural part of life that God has built into his world. Parents raise children, but eventually the children leave and they go cling to someone else. This is how life is supposed to work. You're not supposed to stay home forever and be a child. At some point, a son becomes a husband. At some point, a child becomes a man. A child becomes a woman. And so you have this statement here. Remember, this follows God's creation of Eve. God creates Eve as a Eitzer, a helper for Adam. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. It is a good thing to grow up and get married. It is a praiseworthy thing. It's not a required thing, but it's a praiseworthy thing. And here we have a great example of a man who loves his wife. Notice, he didn't really have a choice in marrying her. This was an arranged marriage by a servant, but he came to love her. It's kind of in again, my wife and I love watching Fiddler on the Roof. Great old movie. I love that scene where the main character and his wife are sitting there, and his daughters have gone off and married these guys, and Tevye is sitting there, and he looks over at his wife and he says, "Do you love me?" Because they were married by arrangement by their parents. And she's like, "What kind of a dumb question is that?" She's like, "Do I love you?" But then she actually has to think about it. 25 years I've lived with you, and we have children together, and I've washed your clothes, and fed you, and you've gone out to work, and you provide a home for me. And all of a sudden she sits down and she very seriously says, "I think I do." Isaac and Rebekah are kind of one of those situations. They didn't get to choose one another, but they came to love one another. Love is a choice, first off. Emotions can come and go. Commitment, love stays. Something else I just want to again point out here about this servant. The story's not really about him, but he gets most of the time frame in the story, right? This is an amazing individual. We don't even know his name. Again, we kind of think it's Eliezer, don't know for sure. But as I look at his life, he's someone who's trusted by others. Abraham trusted him with a very important mission. The guy's totally committed as he goes 900 plus miles on a trip to find a bride for someone else. I don't think I would do that. He's a prayerful person. He's a grateful person. He's focused on success. He wasn't distracted when the family said, "Hey, give us 10 days. Again, I probably would have given him the 10 days. This guy didn't. He was focused. Okay, God's working, God's moving, let's go. But also at the end here, the story passes from him on to Isaac, and he just kind of fades away. Again, very reminiscent of John the Baptist that we're seeing in the book of Luke. The story of Luke begins with John. It really kind of starts with him and this amazing stuff and prophecies about him. But at the end of John's life, and toward the end of his life, he refers to himself not as the point, not as the groom, but as the friend. The friend of the bridegroom rejoices when the groom shows up. He's pointing at Jesus. People are following Jesus. Great. It's about him anyway. Therefore, my joy is complete. He must increase and I must decrease. This servant, as amazing as he was, we really know more about him than about Isaac, to be honest with you. He just fades away because he wasn't the point. He was a great servant. I hope to be a servant someday. I hope Jesus looks at me and can say the things that we observe about this servant of me. And we should all want that. We should all want to be a servant like this person. Whoever he was a great servant. Very quickly, look at this as well. Chapter 25. We again see family matters that extended down to this very day. Abraham then took another wife whose name was Keturah. He's 140 years old. Not sure if this is following this whole thing with Isaac or this is kind of like a jump back, a flashback, but he has another wife named Keturah, and we mentioned this much earlier in the story, and she bore him 6 more sons. So in total, we know at least 8 of Abraham's sons' names. God did indeed give him many sons who would end up being multiple great nations. God kept his promise. Notice one of those sons, however, is named Midian. The Midianites would become an issue in Isaac's descendants' history. We've noticed this before. A lot of Abraham's proclivities. Abraham was a great man. God calls him his friend, but he wasn't perfect, especially as a husband. We're going to see here, not only does he marry Keturah, but it mentions his concubines. Not just Hagar. Apparently there was more. Not something to emulate. And we notice that every time that this happens, it ends up leading to problems down the road. God never condemns him for it, but there were consequences. One of the sons here of Keturah is Midian. He would become the father of the Midianite people who would attack and harass and pillage Israel in later generations. In fact, Joseph, that guy I talked about later, who would be a descendant of Isaac, who would be a slave sold into Egypt, is carried off into slavery by Midianites. Those Midianites are also called something else, though, which we're going to see here in a second. Verse 7, these are the days of Abraham's life, 175 years, and then he breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man full of years. Man, they keep calling him an old man, right? Like, just leave the guy alone at this point. And he was gathered to his people, and Isaac and Ishmael, both of his sons, buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephron, the son of Zoar the Hittite, east of Mamre, in the field that Abraham had purchased from the Hittites and buried his wife Sarah. Now, after the death of Abraham, God blessed Isaac, and Isaac settled in Beer Lahai Roi. It mentions there again a place. Again, value of the book of Genesis. It's specific. It's real history. It happened in a real place. You can go there today. The place where Abraham is buried is one of the most certain of the historical sites in Israel. You know, sometimes people say, well, we know it's in this area, but we're not exactly sure where. We basically know exactly where this was. This site has been preserved for thousands of years, and it's there today. It's called the Cave of the Patriarchs. It's a mosque today there in the West Bank. We saw that last week. It's right there. But notice Isaac and Ishmael are both here for this funeral, but God only blesses one of them. We're going to see this again. In fact, next week we're going to see this. God makes a choice to bless one of Abraham's sons and not another. Now, God was gracious to both. We're going to see that here in a second. But notice that there in verse 11, after the death of Abraham, God blessed Isaac, his son. God promised Abraham before Isaac was born, 40 plus years earlier. Well, now it's even beyond that. Now we're 75 years at this point. God promised Abraham he would have a son through Sarah. God told him what his name was going to be. It's going to be Isaac, and I will bless him with the same blessing, the same covenant that I've given you. We're going to see that again next week. But here we see the first step of that. God blesses Isaac over Ishmael. We're going to see here, it's a contrast between these two sons. God chooses one over the other. In fact, the very next verse says, these are the generations of Ishmael. This family goes a different direction. Look at what it says there about Ishmael real quick. Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's servant, bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael. I'll let you skip through those, or skim those names there. These are the sons of Ishmael, and their names, by their villages and their encampments, 12 princes according to their tribes. Isaac's son Jacob would have 12 sons, the patriarchs of Israel, the tribes of Israel. Ishmael has 12 sons, princes in their own right. Verse 17, and these are the years of Ishmael's life, 137 years, and he breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people. And they settled from Havilah to Shur, which is opposite Egypt in the direction of Assyria, and he, Ishmael, settled over against his kinsmen. God had made a promise to Abraham, I'm going to bless you, I'm going to bless your descendants. That promise is specific to the descendant of Abraham and Sarah, Isaac. God blesses Isaac, not Ishmael. However, when Abraham and Sarah do their own thing and Ishmael ends up being born, God doesn't just kick him out. God makes a promise to Hagar and to Ishmael as well. This is in Genesis chapter 16. God promised Hagar that if she would obey him, go back to Sarah, be her servant, suffer through the abuse and everything else, God was going to bless her and preserve her son and make him a great nation. Here we see the fulfillment of that. He would have many sons, and they would end up becoming the leaders of 12 towns, 12 villages. They're called princes here. It even tells us the area, Havilah to Shur. It's kind of that area between Israel and Egypt, is that area there that's being referred to. But then right here it mentions, and Ishmael settled over against all his kinsmen. This is also what God had said about Ishmael back in Genesis 16. Yes, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to preserve your life. I'm going to make you a great nation. Because I made a promise to Abraham, I'm going to extend this to you and bless you. Again, godly people influence other people. But the other thing that God says there in Genesis 16 is what kind of a man Ishmael is going to be. God calls him a wild donkey of a man who will be against all his kinsmen. This will be someone who will cause turmoil. And we've seen this multiple times already in the book of Genesis. A prophecy about the father of a people tends to kind of identify that group, kind of kind of a stereotype. In fact, Isaac's son Jacob, at the very end of the book of Genesis, is going to prophesy about his 12 sons. Issachar, you're this kind of a guy, and your descendants are going to fit the bill. Judah, Reuben, Joseph, Ephraim, all you. He prophesies about them and kind of what their descendants will be like, and he's right. He ends up being right about it. God promised Ishmael is going to be a man who stands against his family, against his kinsmen, and here we see it again. Well, 1,000 years later, David would write about the enemies of God, those who hate God, the God who blessed Ishmael, who made him a great nation, who preserved his life, kept him from dying in the wilderness. God took care of Ishmael. But 1,000 years later, his descendants have gone a different direction, and they appear amongst the list of people who now hate God and hate the people of Israel. This has been going on a long time. Down to this very day, there are those who hate God, who hate his people, both the people of Israel and Christians. God shows mercy for a time, but eventually there are consequences. Not just for them, though, for each one of us. God showed Ishmael mercy. God blessed him. But through our own choices, it led to condemnation, to conflict that we've seen all through history. Friends, do not be like Ishmael. Be like this servant. Be the guy who follows through, who's committed, who's faithful, who's prayerful, who can trust God and then just pass off the scene. Be a good servant. Follow Jesus. Would you pray with me? Father, thank you so much for your great kindness and mercy toward us, even as you showed to Ishmael and to Hagar, to Abraham and Sarah and to Isaac and now to Rebekah. And we're going to see that continue and extend to many others through the story of Genesis as it continues. One of the great lines of the book of Genesis is right there at the end, where Joseph will look at all the things that happened in his life and he will say, God meant this for good. All my suffering, all the anguish, all the turmoil, all the uncertainty, God meant it for good to save many lives today. God, we don't know why you do what you do. We don't know why Abraham had to wait 25 years, then 40 years. We don't know why Isaac would have to wait. We just trust you. Father, make us people like Rebekah, women of character, of service, of gratitude, of wisdom, of courage, traveling so far from her family to follow your plan. Make us people like the servant there that we see, someone who's committed and focused, who's faithful and trustworthy, and who can simply let the spotlight shift over to where it needs to be. Let us be people like that, humble servants with whom, in the end, you are delighted. Father, may you be delighted in our lives. May you be honored and magnified in our lives, in our words, in our character, in our conduct, in our families, each and every day. Father, may we be a pleasure to you. In Jesus' name, amen. Yes.